Ultralumen trademark is an original fictional universe created by Ultralumen Studios. All characters, locations, and events depicted are works of fiction. This project is independently produced and is not affiliated with or endorsed by any other rights holders. This was never an accident. This was activation. New Lumen was not built by accident. It rose from intention, from ambition, from the belief that the future could be engineered rather than endured. A city of light and glass, shaped by innovation, powered by energy systems once thought theoretical. Here, progress was not a slogan, it was infrastructure. Every tower, every transit line, every silent current flowing beneath the streets was designed to move the Ultralumen civilization forward. Faster, cleaner, brighter than anything that came before it. New Lumen became a symbol. At its center, the arc core sustained the system, not as a single source of power, but as a point of convergence. Ultralight energy flowed through it in continuous circulation, a luminous network that did more than illuminate. It responded. It adapted to demand, synchronized with movement, and extended through every structure as both infrastructure and intelligence. The city was not powered. It was coordinated. A living demonstration of what happens when intellect, resources, and discipline converge toward a single vision. For decades, it stood as proof that order could be sustained, that chaos could be calculated, that ultralumen ingenuity could finally outrun its own limitations. But cities like this attract more than admiration. They draw attention, they concentrate power, and they place immense faith in systems that only a few are qualified to understand. Light became the city's lifeblood, not just illumination, but energy. The foundation of its economy, its security, its identity. Entire districts were synchronized to invisible networks of power, calibrated to respond in milliseconds. Efficiency replaced excess, automation replaced uncertainty. And with every advancement, dependence deepened, because progress does not ask whether it should be used, only whether it can be. In New Lumen, the margin between control and consequence narrowed with every breakthrough. Most ultralumens never noticed. The skyline still glowed. The streets still pulsed with life. They trusted the systems because the systems had never failed them. But change rarely announces itself. It begins quietly, in laboratories after hours, in data streams few ever review, and in moments where knowledge advances faster than caution. In a city built on light, the smallest imbalance can cast the longest shadow. New Lumen believed it had mastered the variables that defined civilization. Risk had been modeled, failures had been simulated, safeguards layered atop safeguards, each designed to correct the last. What the city could not account for was ultralumen brilliance, the moment when curiosity eclipses restraint, and when a single insight advances faster than the systems built to contain it. In a city engineered to control light, the most dangerous force was never the energy itself, but the mind that learned how to shape it. Adrian Vale never set out to change the world. He was not driven by recognition, nor by the desire to stand above others. His focus was narrower and far more dangerous. Vale was a systems thinker, a physicist who believed complexity could be understood, not through force, but through precision. Where others saw limits, he saw inefficiencies. Where institutions accepted compromise, he questioned the assumptions beneath them. His work centered on energy, not as a resource to be consumed, but as a structure to be shaped. Light, in particular, fascinated him. Not illumination, but behavior. The way photons interacted, dispersed, and responded under controlled conditions. Vale believed light could be stabilized, guided, refined into something both powerful and predictable. To his colleagues, the theories were elegant but impractical, too ambitious, too dependent on variables that could never be perfectly controlled. Vale did not dismiss those concerns. He studied them, modeled them, accounted for them in margins few ever read. He understood that progress never arrives fully formed. It emerges through iteration, through risk, through the willingness to explore what others are content to avoid. Late nights became routine. Experiments extended beyond scheduled hours. Data sets grew denser, more promising, and increasingly unstable. The instruments told conflicting stories. Results that should have canceled out began to align. Patterns emerged where none were expected. Vale documented everything. He recalibrated. He cross-checked. Each adjustment brought him closer to a result that defied conventional modeling. A form of energy behavior that resisted decay, that responded to intent as much as input. Warnings appeared quietly. Heat fluctuations. Temporal inconsistencies measured in fractions of a second. Vale did not ignore them. He measured them. Contained them. What he could not anticipate was how quickly theory could outpace infrastructure, or how a single breakthrough could push beyond the safeguards designed to contain it. In a city built on controlled light, Adrian Vale stood closer than anyone realized to discovering what happens when control is no longer absolute. The anomaly did not escalate gradually, it surged. Containment fields collapsed in sequence, each one failing faster than the last. Energy density spiked beyond projected limits, overwhelming systems designed to compensate for far smaller deviations. Light flooded the chamber, not as illumination, but as force. Photonic structures folded inward, compressing into a core that no longer obeyed dispersion models. The instruments reacted too late. Alarms triggered after thresholds had already been surpassed. Adrian Vale was still inside the field when the reaction crossed the point of recovery. The air itself fractured. Consoles shattered under the pressure wave as the chamber's geometry distorted, bending toward the epicenter of the surge. Energy lashed outward in unstable arcs, tearing through shielding designed to withstand far greater loads. Vale was thrown backward as the field expanded, not exploding outward, but unfolding, as if seeking alignment. Light enveloped him, penetrating layers of material and resistance as though they were irrelevant. For an instant, time appeared to slow. The surge did not burn, it recognized. While ultralumens share human ancestry and can pass as human, ultralumens are not human. Ultralumens are phased, stabilized resonance entities. Energy traced along Adrian's internal resonance architecture, synchronizing with the rhythm of his lumen core and the deeper lattice already present within him. Radiant impulses cascaded through his cognition lattice, amplifying pathways established during early resonance alignment, as if the system were re-engaging a structure it already understood. Vale's perception fractured into overlapping spectrums, each band resolving data beyond baseline sensory limits. The field intensified, compressing inward again, cycling through unstable states as though searching for equilibrium. Instead of dissipating, the power focused. Drawn toward the one variable it could not model, the phase-stabilized presence at its center. The system no longer differentiated between subject and environment. Every variable collapsed into a single event. Resonance flowed through Vale's lattice frame with no defined boundary, overwhelming conscious control while amplifying deeper coherent structures beyond stable thresholds. Distortion followed. Not pain, but total systemic saturation, a state of simultaneous alignment and fracture as if the energy itself were testing the limits of his coherence. The chamber ruptured. Debris lifted and suspended in luminous pressure, frozen for a fraction of a second before being hurled outward. Vale cried out, not in fear but in overload, as the pulse flare intensified beyond containment, beyond calculation, beyond anything the system was ever meant to sustain. In that moment, the experiment ceased to be a system, it became an event. When the light finally receded, the chamber was no longer a chamber. Walls had warped under forces they were never designed to endure. Consoles lay fractured, their displays frozen mid-readout, data interrupted by something no system could record. At the center of the wreckage, Adrian Vale remained. Alive. The energy that had overwhelmed the facility did not vanish. It collapsed inward, drawn back into a form that no longer radiated outward, but rested within him. Vale struggled to breathe. His body responded slowly, as if recalibrating to unfamiliar conditions. Sensation returned in fragments. Pressure, weight, the distant echo of sound. The pain faded first. In its absence came awareness. The air around him vibrated subtly, reacting to movements he had not yet made. Light shifted in response to his presence, bending almost imperceptibly, as though recognizing a new influence within the space. Instruments that still functioned struggled to interpret the readings. Values drifted without pattern, recalibrating around Adrian rather than the environment. What had once been background radiation now responded to proximity, to movement, to intent. Vale felt it before he understood it, a subtle resistance in the air, a pressure that yielded instead of pushing back. The light had not disappeared. It had learned where to reside. Vale did not understand what had happened. He only knew that the rules he had relied upon, the constants he trusted, no longer behaved the way they once had. The experiment was over, but its result remained. Somewhere beyond the shattered walls, the city continued uninterrupted, unaware that its balance had already changed. In surviving the event, Adrian Vale had become something the system was never designed to contain, and the light was no longer just energy. It had become responsive, directed, bound to a living system that had survived what no equation could predict. Whatever emerged from the chamber that night was not an experiment, but a convergence. The rupture did not remain contained. Energy released within the facility propagated outward, rippling through the city's interconnected systems. Power grids fluctuated as load-balancing protocols struggled to compensate for irregular surges. Transportation networks paused mid-cycle. Surveillance arrays recalibrated, flagging anomalies they could not classify. Across New Lumen, systems designed for precision encountered uncertainty. Emergency lights flickered on in districts miles from the epicenter. Communications experienced brief interruptions, moments dismissed as routine interference by those trained to trust the infrastructure. Most citizens never realized how close the city had come to instability. To them, the skyline still glowed. The streets still moved. Life continued uninterrupted. But beneath that calm, something had shifted. The energy that once flowed predictably through New Lumen's networks now carried a residual distortion, subtle, persistent, and unaccounted for. At elevated vantage points, sensors registered atmospheric changes not associated with weather. Light refracted differently at certain angles. Static charged the air in patterns that resisted modeling. High above the city, Adrian Vale stood apart from the chaos below. He did not yet understand the extent of what had occurred. Only that the city felt closer, as if the distance between cause and effect had narrowed. New Lumen continued to shine, unaware that its relationship with light had fundamentally changed. The change was not visible at first. It manifested in sensation, a pressure in the air that lingered longer than weather could explain. A static charge that disrupted signals without disabling them. Streetlights recalibrated their output automatically, compensating for fluctuations they could not identify. Transparent surfaces reflected light at unfamiliar angles, scattering color in subtle distortions across glass and steel. In residential districts, people paused without knowing why. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. A quiet instinct registered that something had passed through the city, something too brief to observe yet too precise to ignore. Medical monitoring systems flagged irregular biometric responses, elevated heart rates, neural activity spikes attributed to stress or environmental interference. The data was logged. The explanations were accepted. Above ground, atmospheric sensors recorded ionization patterns inconsistent with any known meteorological event. Cloud formations reorganized slowly, as if responding to forces beneath them rather than winds above. Energy flowed differently now, not disrupted, redirected. The city's vast network of illumination, communication, and defense systems adjusted continuously, maintaining stability without understanding the cause. New Lumen had been designed to adapt. What it had not been designed to do was recognize the emergence of a variable it could not model. Somewhere within the city's glow, the balance between environment and influence had shifted. Quietly, irreversibly, setting the stage for responses that would soon follow. Within minutes, classified systems began to respond. Automated protocols activated across agencies tasked with monitoring advanced energy events. Reports were generated, threat matrices updated, Containment advisories circulated through channels inaccessible to the public. Analysts reviewed fragmented data streams, isolating a signal that should not have existed, a sustained energy signature with no identifiable source. Initial assessments labeled the event an experimental failure. Secondary reviews questioned that conclusion. The readings did not decay, they stabilized. More troubling was their behavior. The signal exhibited coherence, not noise, not interference, but structure. Attempts to triangulate its origin produced inconsistent results. Tracking systems lagged behind observed changes, as if the phenomenon anticipated the methods used to measure it. Models recalculated in real time, discarding assumptions once considered immutable. This was not a power surge. It was not a breach caused by overload or failure. It was something new. Command centers escalated response levels cautiously. This was not a disaster scenario, not yet, but it was no longer dismissible. Surveillance priorities shifted from infrastructure to personnel with direct exposure to the originating site. Access logs were pulled. Communication histories reviewed. Psychological profiles resurfaced for analysis. One name appeared repeatedly across independent systems: Adrian Vale. His involvement raised immediate questions, not of intent, but of proximity. Vale had been closest to the event, temporally, physically, statistically. As monitoring intensified, the signal exhibited further irregularities. It responded to movement, altered in amplitude under observation. Attempts to isolate it from human presence produced incomplete data sets. The conclusion unsettled even veteran analysts. Whatever had emerged could not be separated cleanly from the individual associated with it. At the same moment institutions attempted to classify the phenomenon, Adrian Vale struggled to reconcile what he had become with what the world expected him to be. The systems were reacting. They simply did not know what to do. Internal debates followed. Some argued the anomaly should be isolated and neutralized before it evolved beyond containment. Others cautioned against intervention, warning that interference could amplify effects no longer governed by linear response. Risk assessments conflicted. Predictive models diverged sharply, depending on a single, unresolved variable. Whether the phenomenon was passive or adaptive, that uncertainty stalled decisive action. No protocol existed for an event that blurred the boundary between system and subject. Surveillance continued, restrained by the awareness that observation itself appeared to influence outcomes. In the absence of consensus, institutions defaulted to monitoring rather than control. For the first time since the city's founding, the mechanisms designed to safeguard New Lumen hesitated. Not from failure, but from lack of precedent. Not all observers relied on instruments. In places beyond regulatory oversight, the disturbance registered immediately. The surge left an imprint, a signature recognizable to those who understood power not as energy, but as influence. Somewhere far from New Lumen's illuminated skyline, attention turned toward the city. The event was not interpreted as an accident. It was understood as confirmation. A long-theorized convergence had finally occurred. The light that emerged from the rupture did not behave as raw force. It exhibited restraint, direction. It carried intent, not conscious will, but alignment. Such manifestations were rare, not because they were impossible, but because they required conditions few were willing or able to create. Records resurfaced. Theoretical models once dismissed as speculative were re-examined. Patterns aligned across disciplines that had never agreed before. The emergence of a stabilizing variable altered strategic assumptions long held as doctrine. This was not a threat to be eliminated outright. It was a force to be studied, influenced, redirected. Preparations began quietly, resources repositioned through channels designed to leave no trace. The objective was not confrontation. Not yet. The objective was understanding. Adrian Vale was identified not as an endpoint, but as an origin. The first successful convergence of energy and biology within a controlled system. Others would follow, whether by design or coercion remained undecided. As New Lumen slept beneath its familiar glow, forces beyond its borders began to account for a future in which light no longer belonged solely to infrastructure, but to those capable of commanding it. Adrian Vale was no longer alone in what he had become. He was simply the first to realize that the balance had already shifted. The emergence of such a variable altered long-standing strategies. Power had always been accumulated incrementally, through infrastructure, leverage, and control of resources. This was different. The convergence represented a shortcut past established hierarchies, one that could not be regulated through conventional means. Those who recognized its significance understood the risk of acting too soon. Confrontation would reveal intent. Exposure would invite resistance. Instead, patience was chosen. Observation before engagement, influence before force. If Adrian Vale represented a new axis of power, then the next phase would determine whether that axis aligned with existing order, or fractured it entirely. Such moments were rare enough to redefine eras. History did not record them as turning points at first, only later, once consequences became unavoidable. What mattered now was not reaction, but positioning. The light had revealed itself. And where revelation occurs, intention soon follows. What emerged in New Lumen would not remain isolated forever. It never does. The anomaly didn't create him, it revealed him. Continue the transmission on Amazon.